Thank you so much, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. Far more people than I'd imagined.
Yeah, wow.
It's a great treat to be able to talk about how Billy and I came to collaborate and the sort of shared values that we both really discovered working together for many years, but then were really reinforced as we embarked on the collaboration. And just to touch on how that happened, Billy had been buying pieces from us for many years for his fabulous projects. And then one day I managed to collar him over lunch in London and say, would he consider designing a few pieces for us, which was a natural extension of the bespoke work that he'd been commissioning. He was an unusual client in the respect that he was very comfortable very early to trust our workshops with his ideas. So he was doing really completely new designs, but drawing on the skills of our workshops and marrying them in single pieces. So it felt like a very natural and inevitable collaboration. So Billy, I've got a few questions here to steer, and then we'd love to open it up for you to ask us searching questions. But to what extent do you see craft as an answer to the troubles that Becky just touched upon, which is about there just being a proliferation of stuff in the world and the anxieties that leads to?
I'll say, first of all, super happy to be here, super happy to be in Los Angeles with you, Lulu, and, this really was a dream, this collaboration, working together. I think that we're in the middle of a revolution, similar to the Industrial Revolution of the past, and this is a kind of technological revolution of how information is disseminated, how design is put out into the world, how easily design can be kind of repeated. And, we can think about it in a negative way. I don't think about it in a negative way. Part of it is, and part of our collaboration in this is that I studied industrial design. That was my training, was in how you make a piece of furniture, how you develop a curve, how you do that from the hand to the computer to the factory. What you have shown and what your company so uniquely does is nurture the ability to bring that curve to life through a hand, and we're sitting in it right now with the woven hand. And that can never be replaced. There's no way to AI that away. And I think that as the world moves faster, I just think that instinctually, emotionally, both us personally, I know that we both share this value, but also in the world of our customers and clients, that there's a wanting to have something that doesn't feel like it can just move 1,000,000 miles an hour, and that there is some sort of human connection. And I think I answered the question maybe, but I think that that's what we're kind of doing here.
Thanks. So I think that's sort of about individuality, roots, human connection, exactly all the things that craftsmanship talks to. And I think it is just worth touching on the fact that it is such an abused word, craft. It's very tricky because, we now have artisan sausages, craft beer. It goes on. And so where do we draw the line and say, is that really handmade, or is it just that at the end someone has put a label on the bottle and then they're calling it craft beer? And so it's very easy to fall into the trap. We all do. And I sometimes worry that I'm becoming increasingly cynical because I don't really believe anything I read or I'm told. So I think that's what's exciting about working with craftspeople. You're in the workshop, they're taking the lead. They are the people that understand material. And I think for you that was very important and tied into your industrial design roots.
Yeah, and I mean, I was sort of in the middle I came up in the middle of a huge transition that happened where traditionally designer, before the internet, traditionally people who were designing furniture and lighting and product would toil away at large companies and then get, potentially a commission from a Herman Miller or this, and then their design would come to life. It was never them themselves. And there was also small manufacturers and showrooms that proliferated around America and the world. And around 2009, we start to see that kind of disappear. And we also see Squarespace happen, and this idea of craft, like anyone can do craft. And designers, such as myself, became the maker, and this world of artisanal furniture and furniture that is art, which that is its own wonderful world, but it was not, remember at the time being sort of confused, like, wait, this isn't what I didn't think that this was about. And I had very shaky hands, so I wasn't a very good draftsman, and I was not a very good maker, I spent a lot of time in the wood shop, but you don't want anything that I make, So it's...
Where is it?
My parents have some. It's now taken on a sort of a charming quality to it. But no, I think that's where we're in this sort of interesting spot, and I think that what you've been able to nurture and what was so exciting to me was that it was that you gave access to those craftspeople. You gave access on a level that was extremely difficult to do. Maybe there's weavers in certain parts of the world, but you cannot access them to weave one light fixture. And what you opened up was for the designer who is not the maker, was to be able to have contact with these objects and be able to make, be able to put somewhat of your imprint on it, but also have an involvement in the manufacturing process.
Yeah, well, that's very nice. It's been a total pleasure to collaborate with Billy, and for the workshops, so many craftspeople involved in bringing the designs to life, from saddlers to precision engineers to rattan weavers, textile weavers, and all of them loved the fact, perhaps not every day, but mostly loved the fact, or certainly after the event, that they were pushed to their limits. And there were some shaky moments where we thought, I don't think this is going to work. On one chair, particularly the armchair version of this, it was really complicated. And Billy talked about it as if it was so clear in his mind, the scaffolding that was leather wrapped, scaffolding of the chair that was holding a beautiful sculptural basket, and it just sounded so easy. 22 months later, we got there.
Yeah. Horrible draftsman, carpenter, and engineer, but I have big ideas for all of those things. Yeah.
And a brilliant team who work so hard to also bring your ideas to fruition with our team. So that was very exciting, because a lot of people are involved in the prototyping. It is a hugely complex process, and your patience was very important.
Yeah, and that was, when you came to me with this and when we started talking about it, we knew it was a one of one. And he's not here today, but Jonathan Pastier, has become kind of my other arm in terms of the making of design, of objects.
He's fantastic.
He's fantastic, and he is an extraordinary engineer, and this is where I think also, just like revert back to the original part, that's where the innovation I believe is going to come, and where we're all going to learn to push ourselves. Yeah. That it's not just about how it's made, but you can't easily repeat something that is that has challenging engineering and material combination, which is what we did here, and we talked about that.
Yes.
Because I think maybe the danger is that everything is constantly being iterated downward, that you are always looking at something good and then everybody is saying, okay, how do we make it better, cheaper, faster, and that there's maybe a fear with that. I guess partially because I'm American and I feel like it's like in our DNA. I don't fear that as much as just saying like, look at the reality. I mean, most of the people in this room are interior designers and working in a very personal interaction that is very laborious. It's a really hard business. It's not something that you choose unless you're super passionate about it because it's not easy. And I think that if the product can match that experience or the things that we're making can match that sort of personal experience, then all the better.
Yeah. Well, that talks to really the title of this conversation, which is about tomorrow's manufacturing landscape. And I think that is where all of you come in, because you're the ones that are shaping tomorrow's manufacturing landscape by the way you talk to your clients. And it's really difficult. I see it. I'm on the other side, so we are the suppliers. So I witness the interaction between decorators and their clients in the showrooms. And it's so interesting to see those decorators that can take the lead. They take control as they're walking them around and say, the reason this would work is, do you understand how it's made? It's an education. And I look and think, do these clients realize how damn lucky they are to have this decorator? Because this is the greatest education that they're being given in the history of design, in making, in sustainability. And I think that's why it is so important that questions are asked. We want you to ask every last question of us. We will never mind. And I think that is what we should all be demanding of workshops, because it's too easy to take the shortcuts. And certainly that's for you. You're asking questions all the time. So if there is a lead time challenge, it's really important we can explain to you why it can't be made faster, because we know that you're under huge pressure from your clients. So it is a collaboration across everybody in the process.
Yeah. I think that the client understanding, the manufacturer understanding, and then the intermediary, who's the designer understanding of what manufacturing means.
Yeah.
I think that for years, I remember, like early on in my career, when I came out of design school, I was really obsessed with dinnerware, with plates, and it was the 2008 crisis, and there was no jobs, and there was nothing. I was just, doing whatever odd job, and I decided to, make these plates, and I really wanted to go. I was a huge fan of porcelain and the history of porcelain, and so I thought, well, I must go to China, and I must learn about where the export trade came from, how the manufacturing process works with this. It's called China. And it's, and I did that, and as tends to be with things in my life, they get a little spiraling out of control, and then all of a sudden, I have this dinnerware line, at Neiman Marcus, and it's made at a wonderful factory in China that, is all in plaster molds and things like this. And the customer was really upset, the high-end customer, because they said, well, this is made in China. This is garbage, And I took it a little too far there. But they and it was just so interesting. It was my first insight into perceived value around manufacturing and a deep misunderstanding of what it means to make things, and what the process of making things is, and I think that that's where we're at right now. And it's like you have been able to take an entire country and use it as a little one, but use it as a sort of case study, of what it means, because this also then gets into the conversation of the environment and sustainability, because you can't extract the two things. And one of the things that Lulu has done is it not only is she trying to preserve the craft by buying, the last rattan, maker in England, and England, the heart of the Industrial Revolution, the place that invented, the idea of the factory, like that their making had started to get challenged, and that you wanted to nurture that, but then also trying to say, well, what part of this process can exist on this island? And this was a huge challenge as we were doing all this. We kind of understood, okay, she's serious about making everything in England. We did not understand that meant every single screw. Literally. And we would come up with these designs and we would say, okay, well, we want a little bit of glass here. Oh, so sorry. We've just spent 3 months trying to working with a glass blower in, Lancaster, and it can't be done here. And we're like, what do you mean? And this to me is where we start looking at, in terms of if our conversation is about the future of manufacturing and the understanding of not only how things are made, who things are making, and where. What is the regional focus, and what community are we supporting when we're purchasing that item? And I believe in a global world, so it's like we're looking around in America, we're looking around in England, we're looking around in Asia, and I think it's really about just an understanding.
Yeah, that's beautifully put, because I think actually that, to your point, the perception of value of made in China, it's so unfair. Some of the greatest craftspeople in the world are in China. So let's just celebrate that and be honest and say, these bits are made in China, then it goes to there to have that part, and then it is packaged there. The real problem at the heart of all of this, as far as I'm concerned, is the lack of transparency, and is that people just think we're just going to totally erase the first bit of the story, which is a person working in a factory in China. And it feels entirely wrong in an age when we're talking so much about human rights that our industry is just erasing this whole area of making. So I do think that's where we need to be very open and ask those searching questions. There is nothing wrong with it. It's just we need to know.
Yeah, no, and I think that's something that is also interesting is like, I do think that it's just really important, this perceived value, but also what the object means, and making sure that from a cultural standpoint, we're not putting larger emphasis on a weaver in a Western country as we are putting on a weaver in Southeast Asia, which I think is that is the really interesting thing. Now, Soane, and what you're doing for the UK and what you're doing for this cannot be repeated. It can't be repeated at its scale and with the intimacy of exchange. And so I think that that's what's also important, is having respect for the people that are able to do things at a larger scale with transparency, and then also saying, well, this is able to be done at a smaller scale with a more direct relationship with the actual person that's making it, and we're going to pay a premium for that.
Yeah. And knowing that workers' rights are being respected and that they're being totally celebrated. And it's a tricky conversation because it becomes very serious, and a lot of people quite like the sort of frivolity, the lightness of the interiors world. But actually, it is very serious, and I think that we need to really appreciate that this isn't just the frilly, fluffy stuff. It's really important. So there is...
Lulu and I are both intense.
There'll be some long dinners.
Yeah.
But I think that looking at the work that you do, there was a fantastic New York Times article about one of your projects in LA recently. And I love the fact that Billy's work, you've commissioned us to do such different things. It can go from full-blown chintz, just pure joy, to then really, really pared back, which makes it very exciting to see what you're commissioning. Will you just tell us a bit about that Beverly Hills project? Because it focused on preservation, but also innovation, and they sit beautifully side by side. I don't know how many of you are aware of that project, but it's really fantastic.
No, and I mean, there's two that, across Los Angeles. I've worked here in Los Angeles pretty much every day of my career. I've always really loved it here in a super foreign, magical way. I'm from the East Coast, the Northeast. I'm from Vermont, so it's the most opposite, I guess, place that you can get to the city of Los Angeles. But and for me, my heroes, the Eames, the Frank Gehry, Richard, all these people who kind of were pushing innovative thought of design in America. So much of that is here in Los Angeles. I mean, we have a lot of that in New York, but the open canvas of Los Angeles just provided such great place for that. So I've always loved working on the houses here. And that has sort of been where we have leaned to, is the historic. I'm trying to think if I've ever worked on a super contemporary house in Los Angeles. I don't think so. We've mostly worked in the restoration of mid-century architecture, case study architecture.
And how well protected is that? Forgive me, because probably all of you understand that really well, but... it's to varying degrees.
Yeah. To varying degrees. Depends on what neighborhood you're in. I know that when we were working in Truesdale, it was at least in terms of height restrictions and all that stuff, it is protected. It's hard because a lot of these houses were made, were constructed in a very different way to the way that modern construction is done. So there's a challenge in there that the client is having to, a perfect example is, and I wasn't the architect on this. We worked with an incredible preservation, firm here, but this the Paul Williams house that's in Lafayette Square that we just completed, but that's that has all jalousie windows in the kitchen and various parts of this. This is not to have a window that both is open and closed in modern HVAC situations is is a challenge. So I think that it's always with the client, with how deep in the case of the Williams House, I mean, that was really a national historic landmark, and had to be preserved to the highest degree. And so what we're then sort of thinking of is how we can marry some realities of modern life. How I've taken on a more, and our firm has taken on, and we're starting to think about it intellectually, what it means to do what we call in what is sort of called in architecture school, radical preservation. So you're not, because as a preservationist, you have to follow the exactly what was there before. That is the rule. And if it is new, it has to be a clear line. You don't actually want something to look like it is an approximation of what is there. I personally like the approximation.
Yeah.
I want something to feel like a cohesive environment.
Yeah.
And so it's been an interesting kind of tension, and that's the same thing in Beverly Hills, and in what you say with our work is that we're playing with this. We're like, how are we taking inspiration from the mid-century, but also not having to have you walk into a set of the Jetsons, how does it feel that it's moved the needle without, either feeling like so looking back mid-century mod, or so looking forward that it's like, this doesn't have a sense of place. I think sense of place, I think there's books with that title. It's a very, I think that's something that we talk about as decorators, and I'm I'm thinking about that a lot, and I'm
Yeah.
thinking about that a lot in these projects and with the objects that we're putting in these projects.
Yeah, which is interesting because, of course, that is exactly what I do want, because I was reared on the early Hollywood movies. I was obsessed by them as a child, and I think that's what gave me my interest in interiors with hindsight, because I used to rush back from school, and every single day on the television at 5:40 was a black and white movie. And mostly my obsession was the silent movies, which was sort of odd for a 5 or 6-year-old. But I mean, I just watched them all, and I couldn't get enough of them. And I think with hindsight, that really informed my view of interiors, and particularly the sort of huge epics, you know, the Cedric Gibbons MGM spectaculars from the 20s were something else. Extraordinary sets that they created had a very, very powerful influence. So I love it when I see that purity of design being carried through, because it's sort of, that taught me everything about interiors, particularly from an American perspective. I mean, Hitchcock as well, and the drama and atmosphere that he created. But you can see these threads running through. I mean, Psycho, I can't watch anything nasty, but I could watch Psycho again and again, because...
Well, they're all complete, you know, they're all complete ideas. And,
Yeah.
And I think that this is, you know, the history of our young country. We're not in England, and we're not in these old houses that have evolved over hundreds of years with collections that are layering onto them. Sure, like I'm from New England, there's a couple, you know, that we can talk about, but... You know, and especially in California, you know, this history of the movie and this idea of the set,
Yeah.
you know, and then how that played into architecture with the case study house, with all of this, where it's, you know, Elgin Wolf, like all of this, like it's the idea of a complete thing. And not only the architecture, but then the furniture that matched the architecture, you know, and I think that that's, it's a uniquely American thing that I think has actually affected, you know, modernism. I mean, it's the birth of modernism. So you see it now in Europe, in Asia, and all the other cultures that have, you know, now sort of brought in this idea of like what is a modern complete thing. And then on the opposite side, when we look at traditional decorating and we looked at this eclecticism, you know, it's this idea that we're trying to learn from your people, and more from the outset, create a home that is a collection of things, but also looks like it has been layered over time.
Yeah.
And you see so many people doing this in a very successful way now,
Yeah.
and really trying to do it. You know, so.
But no one using the great Charlie Chaplin device of the trapdoor. I'm still waiting for the decorator that's going to put one in a dining room. Annoying guest, pull the trigger. Down they go.
Yeah.
I'm going to rely on you to do that one.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure about time and where we are, but okay.
Okay.
Thank you. I think perhaps it's a moment to talk about the question that is always asked, which is about craftsmanship being essentially elitist, and that it's not fair to say that people should, because most people can't have a lot of what we're talking about in terms of craftspeople being paid $70 an hour, and if a piece is going to take 90 hours, that's ruling out most people from having access to that piece. So how do we square the elitist badge, really? How do we answer that in terms of talking to clients and advising them how to invest in their home for the long term?
I think that, you know, I've been thinking about this a lot recently, just in terms of, you know, everyone has their own individual values, you know, and everyone, you know, I was recently talking about this because, you know, I grew up in a place where, like, Burlington, Vermont, where like aesthetic investment was not a priority and was actually looked down upon in many ways. And I think that understanding what your clients' values are and being able to educate them on what their investment can support, in the same way that we support universities, the same way that we support charity. Like, yes, it is an enterprise. We're in a capitalist country. You are running an enterprise. But also by investing in what you are creating, you're also, there's a knockdown effect in the $70 an hour worker and in the factory that you're supporting. And is that something that they want to support? You know, and I think that being able to have that conversation from the outset and being able to say your home is not only a vessel for your family and for your life and all this stuff, but it's also a vessel for your values, you know? And it doesn't mean it's not bad to get the Pier 1 Imports chair. Yeah. It's not bad because that might be, you know what, you might be putting your money towards the local hospital, you know, and it's not going to go into this very expensive wicker chair, and that's okay, you know. But it's just being able to have that dialogue and being able to have the knowledge of that you're being intentional, whichever direction you're going. And
do you feel that your clients are mostly happy to have that conversation?
Yeah. You know, I mean, I think that we all. A budget is a huge part of our job, you know, so inevitably you're going to have that conversation because at some point because you're not only just like swirling the florals around, but like you do have
it's a good vision.
Yeah, that's my favorite part. But you do have a fiduciary responsibility, you know, and I think that ultimately the values and what somebody puts their money into kind of coexist.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Billy. So perhaps this is a moment to see if anybody has any questions, given that you are the ones that are going to be taking this conversation forward with your clients and with your suppliers. So if anyone does have something they'd like to... Hi. Hello.
And your lighting. How do you find these people who do this work for you, these artisans, how do you find these people?
Well, it's evolved. It's got a lot easier. So Soane is nearly 30 years old. And when I started, I spent a summer travelling around England looking for workshops and sort of researching the history of British making. And then it was really difficult. People were very generous and they'd say, well, now you're in Devon, you must go and see so-and-so, they're just down the road. And they'd say they're a stone carver. I actually may not have been looking for a stone carver, but I started to build a sort of a dress book of makers, which then at certain points I drew upon. But it was really difficult. And in fact, the big challenge was rattan. When I was looking for a rattan workshop in probably now 22 years ago or something, and everyone I spoke to said, it's gone in England, you're not going to find one. And I said, it can't have gone. It was huge. You know, these pictures you've been seeing, we did all the rattan, the workshop that we eventually took on for the British Embassy in Washington. Lutyens commissioned it. The rattan for the Titanic. The list goes on. It was being sent around the world from a little village in Leicester, where we still are. So eventually I found the workshop, and there were just 2 people still weaving, having been a huge industry. So we then decided to put in apprentices and build it up again. So that's become much easier because as that story spread, people would write and say, could we... I think the first time we advertised for apprentices, we had 2 replies. I think now we get about 250 for every job advertised. So that's definitely has gone in the right direction. But different skills. We're working with the last person in the UK that can do mouth-blown glass, sheet glass. And in fact, he didn't have the skill necessary, but he was so brilliant, we sent him to America to learn. So he came over, in fact, to the West Coast to work with a workshop over here. They were very generous to share their skill. So really, it's just a lot about finding someone somewhere in the world that can teach someone in the UK. We worked with a Japanese origami artist, but who's in London, to come and work with UK-made paper. So it's really just about looking for people that are generous enough really to share their skills. but we're constantly advertising and really training in-house is the only way, because the design schools no longer teach many of these skills.
Thank you.
Hi, this one is for Billy. Billy, thank you for responding to my DM about keeping my blue tile bathroom. I am like such a huge fan, and especially of the Lily Allen whole deal of it all. But to that end, my question is about when you go into someone's house and they have this, tile from the 60s, or they have something that was there when they moved in, and their instinct is to change it because they want to have a whole new vision, but you see the beauty in what is there. What is your approach for presenting them with options that incorporate things that maybe you feel like have staying power from a historical standpoint, or just aesthetic, this would be fun or cheeky or whatever, and then marrying that with their, growing family or desire to have 2 sinks or whatever it may be?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. Good to meet you. I think it's inherently the process, like the whole process, and I talk a lot with my clients about like this, the vision, like what do you want that aesthetic line to be through the house? And, sometimes it's preservation, and sometimes, the conversation from the start is that this is not going to work. The second is the function, the drawings, does that bathroom make sense where it is? Does it have everything that it needs for the owner, and for their children or whatever it is? And then the third leads to the most fun, like the budget, and sort of saying, is preserving this going to cost more? Is it going to cost less? Is it going to, be more of a hindrance, or is it also going to be like we're saving this because we just love this tile so much, but it's going to make every other bathroom in the house look completely bizarre, and ultimately, like, real estate is someone's investment, so that's really on them to have that conversation with their real estate agent and how long they want to live in a house. And I'm not very good at making suggestions about house flipping. That's not really good. But yes, that is always like a part of it. I hope I answered.
Thank you.
I think that's perhaps a moment to wrap it up. But thank you all very much for coming to hear us.
Thank you, Lulu.
Thank you, Billy.
Thank you.